afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. As always, I'm Brian Doyle.
Yeah, I'm Tim McNeil.
And you may call me Rob.
And we will call you Rob today. Rob with two B's, baby.
That's right.
One is just not enough.
So I was Robbie all my young life, Brian. And when I got into 8th grade, I was too cool for Robbie. So I dropped off the IE because I wanted to be the cool Rob, right? Didn't realize it literally wasn't until high school that I realized that it was supposed to be ROB. But then it was cool. I was like, yeah,
that, this is a manufactured thing. I get it now. I thought this was like some sort of family tradition.
No, I was just too embarrassed to change it.
I never knew that, but it's everything I expected.
It does kind of line up exactly where you would expect it to be, right?
Yeah. And then I had to play it off. I had to fake it till I made it, with that one.
That is definitely a story of nerd cool right there.
Yeah.
I just know this every time I go to send you an email with voice recognition, it doesn't like the two B's. But anyway, now we know the story of Rob, and that's a good one, man. I'm kind of absorbing that at the moment. But now we're going to put our trust in ROBB. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk a little bit kind of about, the owner-led sales process and when is it time to transition out? And more importantly, how do you do it? And Tim and Rob, I know this is an area that you guys have great experience in. Obviously, with OSR, it's something you've seen and it's something you live through too. So I think this will be, a good blueprint for some of those MSPs that are kind of hitting that inflection point where they're starting to go, man, should I bring in a sales rep, or what should I do to kind of reduce some of my sales load? So I'm going to take a step back, and I don't know which of you'd like to kick it off, but I'll let you take the show.
Yeah,
sure. Tim, you want to kick us off there, buddy?
Yeah, sure. So, look, it comes in different shapes and sizes as far as when the principal starts to kind of phase out of the sales cycle. And to be clear, in our experience, they never really fully phase out. Like there's always a place for the CEO or C-level or principal to go out and close the larger deals, right? Mm-hmm. There's always going to be a segment of prospects, we'll call it 50 or 60, maybe 75 seats and above, where it just warrants that CEO to CEO conversation. Specifically, this is kind of topical. I was talking with a client of ours today about this exact topic. They're $5 or $6 million a year, multiple locations, really good company, very squared away. Actually, I already have salespeople on staff, and he's still trying to figure out how to back out. And in his scenario, we can get into what to do pre-salespeople, but in his specific scenario, I just recommended what we did when Rob and I were in the industry. And it's as simple as as the principal, you've got to draw a line in the sand, and you've got to say, I am no longer going on meetings of this many devices and below. And you've got to be able to identify a good salesperson who has good synergy with the sales engineer, so that when they're out, one person can never, two people have a chance to really have that multi-pronged approach that a principal can bring to the table. But if you have a salesperson doing it on their own or a sales engineer doing it on their own, they're going to struggle with it. So you've got to have that tandem that can, in theory, replace that principal. So that's again very topical because it's a conversation I had today, and Rob, I'm sure there's a lot more you can add to it, but that from just a very basic stance, creating that threshold or creating that line in the sand is probably the first place to start.
Yeah. Rob, we'll throw this one to you, but I got a question there. I heard something there, Tim, and I'd like you guys to expand on it, which is they should already have a salesperson, it sounds like, when they're looking to make this transition. So it's not start transitioning first, then find a salesperson, but you really have to find that sales resource before you can begin this process. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say that's probably the most important part, right? And I do think that's where some MSPs, they get ahead of their skis a little bit. and they hire a sales, and we've seen it with the fractional sales manager side of what we do. A lot of, or not a lot, but there's enough MSPs where they expect a salesperson to start on day one, and day two, they're going to be closing business or have the ability to. That's just not the way it goes. I mean, it can take 18 months. That's maybe a little long, but it can be a while. It can be a while. It really can. So.
I would say this, when do you get your first sales rep? You have to get your first sales rep before you need your first sales rep. If you're at the stage where you're burnt out and you can't go talk to another prospect, you're way behind the 8 ball, and you are going to set yourself up for at least a year and a half of misery, right? Because you're already burnt out. Then the sales rep is not going to be successful. Then, on top of everything, you didn't even onboard the sales rep because you just didn't want to deal with it anymore. So there's so many things that you have set yourself up if you're going to go into this when you have to do it because you're burnt out. You've got to go in before that mentally. If you've tried to go in, if you're a principal led, you're doing okay. You just don't have time for it anymore. And you kind of want to explore and start to build and start building that momentum from there. That's the best case scenario that we've seen, right? It's the person that's burnt out is where things are really struggling to, it takes longer basically to get that whole process up. Because it's like pulling teeth to get all the processes out of their head, right? And making sure that we can teach that rep how to be successful. I would say, Brian, so Tim was talking about it after you have reps and what are some of the processes and procedures to extricate yourself out more. How do you get that first rep and really go through that? Just like you're building a project and you're building a project with a client, and the better information that client gives you, the better you can do on that project, right? The better the scope, the better the project. It's the exact same thing with the rep. The better the onboarding, the better processes and procedures that you have when you're trying to onboard that rep, the faster they are going to be able to kind of kick the training wheels off and be out there without you. I've never seen a sales rep be successful without an owner or a systems engineer within the first 9 months. Just never seen it be successful.
Doesn't happen.
No, when I started my career, I dragged my sales engineers out as often as I could, wherever I could, because it just gave another level of confidence. But also, my job was to steward the deal, pilot the process. I didn't necessarily have to know all the information. And that's something that I think, owners have to make sure that they're investing into also during that transition. Is that concept of not being alone on the island, right?
Yep. Yeah, 100%. It's a lot of documentation in the beginning before you get that rep, right? So like when you work with us now, we make you do all that documentation to begin with before we can even start trying to recruit for a rep. We've got to get all that information in the system. We've got to make sure it's all processed out. Then we can start getting a rep. Reps won't put up with it anymore. 10 years ago, they were happy to do it. Now you better have your marketing understood. You better have all your processes and procedures. You better have your roadmap for success and where they can go in the company. You got to have all these things done now, or the good reps will dump you and they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, good reps in our industry are always in demand because it's a tough role to fill.
Yeah.
Well, it really is, and I think we've talked about it on here before. I mean, people think that whatever industry they're in is probably the hardest industry to sell into, right? I would put the MSP industry right up there with literally one of the hardest places to sell. So if you can be successful within the MSP community as a sales rep, you've done something right. But that doesn't happen unless you have the sales engineer behind you, unless you have the process behind you, the scripts, the objections, the leads, the things that we've talked about on here before, right? A lot of MSP owners, when they hire techs and engineers, they've got a 90-day ramp period for them. But when they hire a salesperson, maybe they have a CRM, maybe they don't, maybe they have a list, maybe they don't, they probably don't have scripts, or if they do, they're very canned. It's just being prepared right out of the gate, like what Rob said, right? You don't want to do it when you need it. It's probably too late. It's when you want to find that sweet spot where you've got the cash flow and you can start building out that process and bring somebody in, and that gives you the runway to have that person be successful.
I got a question for you, Brian. Real quick. What is the best onboarding that you've ever seen with a rep? It could be tech, it could be HR, and I'm talking about the where you send something to their house before you onboard them. Like, what is the best example of a culture type of onboarding that you've ever seen?
That's an interesting one, because I think it also depends on the arena, the size of the MSP. Obviously resources come into play, but I know this, like when there was a point in time where when we ran Fandotech, and not saying that we had the greatest onboarding, honestly, our HR person helped us with this. As a group of technological leaders, we certainly didn't do it right, but they really put us into a thing where you hire that person. Then when they accept their offer, we sent them out a small gift. Usually it was a basket, and it was geared towards gifts towards the spouse, one way or another.
Spouse.
If it was a woman, it was more men's kind of stuff mixed in, and vice versa, just because we wanted the spouse to know we are going to be taking up a lot of your significant other's time, but you're part of the greater good, which I thought was really cool. Like, I would have never.
Very cool.
Right.
Those were the best ones that I've seen too.
Then one of the things that we tried to do was, usually these guys had a 2-week window before they were going to be able to start with us. And we would try to meet the resource for lunch about a week before, and then bring one of our other team members that were going to work with them. So we could have a little one-on-one before they get there, and they could kind of make a friend before showing up at the office. Like, they have at least that one familiar face when they're walking into the lion's den on day one, who's talked them up potentially a little bit. And usually, we tell people to be honest. Hey, if you didn't really like the guy, don't say anything. But if you did, let your people know where you think they're going to be able to help. So we used to try to make it where they communicated around the room. And again, this was driven by having an actual pure play HR department helping us with this. We would have never gotten there. Right. But it stuck with me. And then it was, when they come on board, make sure they're ready to work. And what I mean by that is, don't still be chasing a laptop and you're on this thing. Make sure at their desk they've got all the tools they need to start working. Yeah, you might still be acquiring swag and things like that. And certainly if you got a t-shirt to throw there, that's always a nice touch. But make sure that they have the tools to do their job, because there's nothing worse than getting there and being told, we're going to get you your password to XYZ system in 4 days. Because those 4 days, they don't have much to do if they're waiting to get into those critical systems. So let
your
them
laptop's on the way.
Yeah, let them hit the ground running. You don't want to overwhelm them, but you want to know that you've already brought them in and you're expecting them to be solid.
And you thought about them.
I remember when I came in as a hired gun over at PCNet years ago, after we exited from our MSP, and I wanted to build a couple data centers. One of the biggest things is, there was a couple things going in, but the day I started, this I disagreed with a little bit. They were like, all right, so you've got until next Friday to come up with your business plan. And then basically I was left in my little corner office alone to come up with a business plan for this new venture division. I'd have to seek out people to get insight about the company. I'd have to seek out people to understand what resources were at my disposal now. And it sat with me. So, one of my personal things now, I'll get away from what the great HR department taught me that I would have never figured out on my own. But I figured out that you've got to set a daily touch point with each one of the people you're bringing on. I used to do it for 2 weeks. Basically, in week 2, it turned into, if we're good, just tell me we're good. I don't need to take your time. I don't need to take you away, so we can look at each other. But, let's catch up at the end of each day and tell me what you don't understand, where you might need help. What resource can I give you? Who do you go to? If you got a list of who do I go to get that, sit down and go, yeah, okay, direct traffic. That's a Jillian thing. That's a Brian thing. That's a Joe thing. And get those people squared away. And, it naturally tapers off. Almost none of them did I have to go the full 2 weeks. But you make sure you're putting in your calendar for 2 weeks so they're not neglected. It's not like we're usually bringing on more than one at a time in the or in the MSP world anyway. So, you can make that commitment.
Well, and I think
hopefully that answers the question, Rob.
You just said an important thing there, right? mean, granted, maybe a division that wasn't built yet, but for somebody to translate that to today, if we had a rep that we hired go into one of the MSPs that was a client of ours, and that client said, "All right, go figure it out," like that just doesn't fly anymore.
Well, if you got a junior rep, it's tough. I mean, to be fair, I was
You
mid-career,
knew the well.
senior
You knew the well.
executive. You know, I
Yes.
kind of understood this is why you're here. Go make it
Yeah.
happen. But I also
Yeah.
think there's a reality of, okay, but I need to know you, your culture. I need to know
Yeah.
beyond what 3 hours of interviews might have told me in order to, make sure that I'm not going to start barking up a tree that's the wrong tree for you, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm not the master in this case.
Yep.
Yeah,
Two things.
100%.
So first, one of the things that I thought that Timmy and I have always done this, and we've always encouraged people to do this. Day one, make sure you have a little bit of swag on their desk. You have to have everything that's going to be on their desk working, has to be ready from 8 o'clock on. They may not be able to use it that day, but they have to know that you put in the work and that you are looking forward to them being there. Number one. Number two, day one, they get lunch in the office. You bring in lunch to the office, and everybody has to come in for at least a minute to check in with that new person in the lunch area. And Brian, we found out so much about that person at that lunch. What kind of personality are they? What kind of talker are they? What kind of listener are they? All the information you find out when you just have everybody come in at different times, right? And like everybody's got stuff to do, but you all have to go through the water cooler area. And it was just a way to build up the relationship a little bit before you moved forward. Did you guys ever do that?
Well, actually, we did kind of a reverse approach to that, but I like that approach because it's also a little bit of a reward for your team too, right?
Yes.
Everybody likes a free lunch.
Yep.
We used to go, okay, this person's going to be interfacing with X, Y, and Z on the regular. And, my group was a bit, a couple big guys. We liked our lunch, it was part of the day. So we would generally take them out to lunch, but make sure that we had key people that wouldn't normally potentially be in the lunch circuit, right? But are going to be people that are going to be working with that person. If it was a help desk person, one of the other people in the bullpen and the help desk to make sure they got there. But then also bring in, obviously their manager would be there, but then bring somebody that's in a world that has nothing to do what they do. So a lot of times it was bringing our marketing and development person into those meetings. So the people at the help desk, that this help desk resource could hear how we're trying to go to market a little bit, but vice versa, they can listen how, really, one of my things I was always trying to pass on my marketing people is our best salespeople are our techs. They are the biggest, most, the conversation happens most with our customer, usually at the help desk, usually with specific help desk personnel with specific accounts. And we need to be training them things to say and not to say as well, indirectly, because they are the focal point with the customer.
Yep.
Even if they're not supposed to be, right? Realistically, account managers just naturally didn't see them as much. So Rob, to your point is we did a very similar thing, but in a different way. It was more, let's get them off campus. Let's buy them a nice lunch. Let's bring in a couple people that they're going to work with, and then bring somebody that they're not going to interact with, just to broaden their scope and visibility within the organization. But I like both approaches, because the other one is a little reward for your team beyond those, core people I just talked about. And everybody gets in to get their 2 cents. And you're right. I think back to those lunches now, there was a lot of talking to the person. I could say they were good listeners or they were just shy or whatever, but they didn't have as much time to talk back, because usually the people I brought with them weren't in that let's listen. They were more, I'm supposed to be here to educate kind of thing.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, I can tell you the style that we used to do, where we would get lunch and have people come in, it was, first off, as an MSP, if you're going to do this, there are the techs, the engineers, they're not allowed to just go in, get a piece of pizza or whatever, sandwich, whatever. They're not allowed to just go in, get something and go back to their desk. That happens a lot.
Make them sit and eat right there, right?
At least 5 minutes. They have to sit there for 5 minutes.
Doesn't have to be forever.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have to be an hour, just for at least a couple of minutes. That's it. Right. But most importantly, what you're trying to, if you haven't already done some sort of going back to the recruiting phase, during the recruiting phase, if you didn't do some sort of meet the team, then it's really your time to make sure that the salesperson is interacting appropriately with other people. And
yeah, so listener Tim just tied it back to probably the question on the table. Well, how does this relate to transitioning out of the owner-led piece? Well, it absolutely does, right? Because you want to see how your sales rep's going to talk with the team. You want to see how your sales rep's going to interact with others, what their interpersonal skills look like. They're always going to treat you well. You're the guy that hired them, right? It's how do they act with others? Because that's going to be a good representation of how they're going to work with your customers. And, I love what you said in the beginning, Tim, too, because one of the biggest challenges for a sales rep when they're getting started is having those little wins that help carry them forward and continue to keep that momentum going. We know it's a tough job. We've covered this on a number of calls that, cold calling is a grind today because you're just not getting people at the desk, right? You've got to find creative ways to get in there. It's certainly, good sales reps are not having the same level of success in numbers that we did 10 years ago, 12 years ago, right? Because the mediums have changed. But if you're an owner who can say, I'm backing off anything, let's just use 10 and under as a number right now. That means any of those referrals you pick up from your trade shows, not trade shows, but your local networking, your friends and family, you can get in that sales rep's hands, get them more exposure at the client level so you can see how they run a deal, even while they're still chasing their deals, see if they can close, before you invest 4 months in their prospecting. And then all of a sudden, when they finally get an opportunity to go show up somewhere, they can't perform. You get to look at that as well. And the win back for the rep is, maybe it's an abbreviated commission, maybe it's not, but I'm getting a couple deals under my belt. I feel like I'm contributing to the team. I feel like I'm learning my craft while I'm banging my head doing the prospecting side, which unfortunately every sales rep knows, necessary evil and a grind.
Yep.
Sorry,
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
All I was going to say was an extension of everything you just said was, if you pick that, whatever that number is, 10 devices or less, it's a low, most MSPs are going for 20 or above or a larger amount, right? So give the sales rep the smaller ones to screw up on. It's a lower risk.
Yep. It's not going to make or break your organization. It's not going to make or break his projected cost.
Exactly.
Yeah. 100%. Okay. Well, fellas, we're coming to the end of this, but I heard you say something there, Brian, and I just wanted to maybe throw out one little tidbit of information for people as we're closing down here. When you get that new sales rep on and you've given them that, lunch for the day, one of the things that we found very successful in trying to understand that rep as the principal to try and see, is this rep going to be able to talk to people that they have no idea who they are, is to give them a questionnaire, right? Just a questionnaire. They have to go to every person in the company over the next first couple of days. They got to talk to them a little bit, find out a little bit of personal information about them, find out the summary of what that person does at the company and their title. Then they have to come back, and this is the important piece, Brian. Then they have to come back. They have to type it all up in an email and give it to you. You're going to find out how good they are at having conversations with people that they've never spoken to before, and coming back with the appropriate amount of information and being able to send that to you in an email. That right there will tell you it's gold. It changes the whole dynamic, because then you understand what you're looking at with that rep and what you're going to need to work on in the future.
You're going to understand writing styles.
Yeah, yes. But I'm even going from the first phase of that, which is you've sent them on this little pseudo scavenger hunt, but more importantly, you're forcing them to do what's uncomfortable, right? Yep. You're getting them to talk to people they don't know and ask some questions that might be personal, which are things that we do.
Yep.
In a sales call, right? We got to talk, risk is the conversation these days as much as anything else. And, that's an amazing concept, because, it gets them to know the team, it gets them to know the lay of the land, but it also gives you those two facets you said, the ability to see if they can strike up a conversation with people, and you can get feedback from those people on whether or not they felt that they asked the right questions. And then seeing how they write is critical, although you would have probably fired me then, Rob, every time. That would have been the one that killed me. So I did not realize till I got freaking Grammarly how bad apparently of a writer I am.
Yeah.
Fair. That's
Don't
fair.
tell anybody those stories. That's from
Yeah,
back in the day.
No, that's okay, man. I'll take it. I'll take it right on the chin.
All right, fellas. Well, we're coming up to the end here. I appreciate you guys jumping on and talking about this. You know, Brian, I love talking about sales. This is my thing here, especially teaching people all these types of ideas. Brian, Tim, for everybody who's listening, we will have all this information up, and maybe we'll even include the questionnaire that we give, so people can have that as well as a little leave behind. You guys have any closing thoughts as we're passing?
I want to say, listener, just a little side funny story. Rob told us we couldn't do more than 2 minutes on onboarding before this call. And by my count, that conversation started 16 minutes ago. But anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. You
It's
rev
like I said,
Robbie up and let him go.
We pulled more than 20 minutes out of a white space analysis.
If you saw Rob's face before
shit
this,
out of it.
listener, he was like, dude, that's a 2-minute soundbite.
Yeah. All right, fellas.
Awesome, guys.
All right, appreciate it. Have a great
I'm going to
week.
say it for you, Rob. This was a great episode.
This was a great episode. I got to talk a lot. I love it.
Awesome, guys. Thank you.
Take care.